Welcome back to the Daily Dope Show. I'm your friendly commentator, Brian Strong. And before we get started, see this old raggedy shirt? Not for long. About to get a new shirt because I just ordered some shirts on Teespring today. So if anybody out there is interested in one of these, the link will be down there. Unfortunately, I just got the black ones right now, so if there's a different color that you like, maybe there'll be more in the future. See how this thing even goes. But yeah, I know a few people that wanted some shirts, be it people that I don't know any other way but through here, or be it people that I've known for years. But they're only $15, and $1 will go to normal. A lot of people are critical of normal these days. I've really only gave money to normal and My Legalize. Those are the only two organizations that are nonprofits or whatever that are marijuana legalization related. And I've been given to normal since I was really young. Did fundraisers for them, in fact. Sat at some of their booths in Michigan before to kind of fill in for somebody that was taking a break or whatever here and there. So I've kind of did this story already, but we're going to do it again because more details came out about it. And we're on the edge of a deadline for the story. As you'll see, Friday the 13th this week, there's going to be a motion filed by Jeff Sessions. We'll see what goes on with that. But let's get out on top of it. This is the face of the 12-year-old girl that actually is one of the plaintiffs that is bringing this lawsuit on the federal government, basically challenging the Controlled Substances Act and marijuana being on it. So this is by Madison Margolin over here at Rolling Stone. 12-year-old Alexis Bortell uses cannabis oil called Haley's Hope to prevent life-threatening epileptic seizures. She takes the oil orally by syringe twice a day and always keeps a THC spray on hand in case she experiences an aura or pre-seizure event. The auras happen maybe once every 3 to 4 weeks, far less often now than when now that she moved to Colorado than when she lived in Texas. When doctors in Texas were left with no other option than to suggest an experimental lobotomy, her parents moved to Colorado. Quote, I'm now over 2 years seizure-free because of my cannabis medicine. In Texas, our goal was 3 days, and that's the max I ever got, says Bortell, who is now in the 6th grade. Quote, it's helping me succeed in school more since I don't have to go to the nurse every day because of the auras and seizures. There was no medicine in Texas that would stop my seizures, and not only that, but they had horrendous side effects that would be worse than the actual seizure. Yikes. Wise and articulate beyond her years, Bortell received an invitation from the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, NORML, to lobby her representatives in Washington, D.C. this past September. But she couldn't go, and instead could only Skype. Since Bortell couldn't go anywhere without her cannabis medicines, she couldn't travel without committing a federal felony by transporting a Schedule 1 narcotic across the state lines. What's more, even if she could travel to D.C., where marijuana is medically and recreationally legal, she couldn't bring her medicine onto federal land, including the Capitol, national parks, monuments, and military bases. And by the way, her father, Dean Bortell, is a military vet. Now Bortell is one of 5 plaintiffs in a lawsuit against the federal government, and her attorneys argue that the Controlled Substances Act, the CSA, which classifies cannabis as illegal, infringes upon various constitutional rights. Quote, this is not just a case about the CSA. This is a civil rights case that focuses on the rights of individuals using life-saving medication to preserve their lives and health, says Bortell's attorney, Michael Hiller, founder of Hiller PC and former professor of constitutional law at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Quote, "It's not just about cannabis, it's about people's ability to exercise their right to free speech, to petition the government for a redress of grievances under the First Amendment, the right to travel, the fundamental right to be left alone, and the right against congressional overreach." The federal cannabis lawsuit team, co-counsel Michael Hiller, Lauren Ruddick, Joseph Bondi, and David Holland filed a complaint in September to the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. The lawyers, who are all members of the New York Cannabis Bar Association, are working on the case pro bono in hopes of winning a watershed decision descheduling marijuana under federal law. Here's Alexis Bortell with her father, Dean. As the federal government is wont to do, the defendants, Jeff Sessions, the Department of Justice, Chuck Rosenberg, acting director of the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the DEA itself, and finally, the United States of America, will file a motion to dismiss on October 13th. If the judge grants the motion, the plaintiffs will file an appeal to the Second Circuit. What kind of a judge would do that? Would just throw this one away right when it got to the judge. I mean, these seems like some legitimate concerns. If nothing else, you have the right to travel, the fundamental right to be left alone. Too bad, we can't have something in the Constitution about somebody's medicine. No, we got to have stuff in the Constitution to protect you, to make sure that everybody can have a gun. That's important. Medicine, I guess that's just on you, whether you can afford it or not, or whether your medicine that works for you is even allowed by law. And by the way, the big problem here isn't even that. It's that she really can't, she's confined to just Colorado, because even leaving for 1 minute, she's going to have to cross some state border, so she can't bring medicine with her. And then once she gets across that state border, then it's anybody's guess how soon you can obtain new medicine, or if it's even legal at the next location. So the case could have ramifications throughout the country. Oh yeah, and by the way, they're going to file their motion to dismiss on October 13th. That's this Friday. And somehow I'll have an update for that. It might not be its own clip, but I will mention that somewhere along the way. So if the court were to grant our relief, requesting a declaration that the CSA is unconstitutional as applied and enjoining the federal government from enforcing it, the case really has a potential to impact tens of millions of people, says Hiller. As a plaintiff, Bortell represents the thousands of children with epilepsy who stand to benefit from descheduling cannabis. But even broader applications and interests are at stake. Co-plaintiffs include 6-year-old Jaeger Coate, a Georgia-based medical marijuana patient who suffers from Leah's disease, which disables and kills 95% of its victims. Joe Bellin, a disabled veteran of 2 tours in Iraq, now living with PTSD in Florida. Marvin Washington, former pro football player who's now launched a line of CBD products. And the Cannabis Cultural Association, a nonprofit helping people of color enter the cannabis industry. The attorneys argue not only the CSA infringes on the plaintiff's constitutional rights, but that the foundation of marijuana's place under the CSA itself is bunk. Quote, "The whole explanation for why it's a Schedule I substance is predicated on lies and racism," says Holland, executive and legal director of Empire State Normal and founder counsel to High Times Magazine. In their complaint, the attorneys allude to the past 10,000 years of history, highlighting the various ways in which mankind has used cannabis medicinally and functionally. Fast forward to 18th and 19th centuries, the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution on hemp paper, while pharmacists sold marijuana tincture over the counter. Marijuana and hemp, both different kinds of cannabis, are distinguished by their THC value. By the 1920s and 30s, cannabis became more closely associated with Mexican immigrants and African American jazz musicians. thanks in large part by the reefer madness that it didn't focus at all on maybe the white use, but I'm sure the numbers probably weren't like zero. In 1937, Federal Bureau of Narcotics Director Harry Anslinger drafted the Marijuana Tax Act, imposing criminal penalties on possession, production, and sale of cannabis, and commencing the modern-day war on drugs. By the 1960s and 70s, cannabis became the common denominator between Vietnam War protesters and radical groups like the Black Panthers. Nixon's own right-hand man, John Ehrlichman, came out decades later explaining that criminalizing marijuana was a means of criminalizing blacks and hippies. Quote, did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. And let's not forget that Nixon had the LaGuardia report made, where basically the report said marijuana is the safest substance known to man, it shouldn't be prohibited, it shouldn't be included in the Controlled Substances Act, blah, 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 blah. Nixon threw that thing in the paper shredder and went on with the drug war. When the CSA was enacted in 1971, marijuana was placed in Schedule 1 only temporarily, even though by definition it didn't fit that category. And remember, this is just after the two United Nations commissions on drug abuse where they kind of set the guidelines for member nations to set up their own scheduling systems, and then they showed their own scheduling system. They're all pretty much the same. They got like 3 levels of bans or really hardly controlled substances or whatever. Today, the blacks and Latinos are still disproportionately victimized by prohibitionists. And that's evident in no matter how you want to dice that up, like the prison industrial complex, it's pretty tilted towards people with nonviolent drug offenses. And they're always minorities, dominating that. Okay, so even in places like Colorado, where minority kids are arrested for weed, more minority kids are arrested for weed than anyone else, while in California, police arrest blacks for weed 3.5 times more than whites. That's probably part of the reason why it don't budge off of Schedule 1 right there. Man, there's a lot of racism still going on in our government, systemic. That's the biggest one, man. There's more black people in prison today than there were slaves. We've always had the federal government policing our bodies, says Jacob Plowden, co-founder and creative director of Cannabis Cultural Association. And even legalization hasn't always worked, he added. This case is the only way to turn the system on its head. And that's the truth, man. I've been reporting on this all along, man. No matter how much legalization you get, we still get all these marijuana arrests. In some cases, the marijuana arrests increase in legalization. What's going on? What is deeply troubling about all this is that the CSA makes absolutely no sense, says Hiller. We know for a fact that the U.S. government knows that cannabis cannot legally be classified as a Schedule 1 drug, the requirements for which are a high potential for abuse. Nope, marijuana don't have that. You can't really abuse it. It doesn't make you so intoxicated or whatever that you can no longer function. So I don't know. It doesn't make you do things you normally wouldn't do if you were sober. So how can you abuse it? You do too much and you fall asleep and you sleep too long, I guess. No medical efficacy whatsoever. We know that ain't true. There's already studies that have been authorized that are good to go, and the government has their own, and we'll get into that in a second. And a substance so dangerous that it can't be tested even under the strict medical supervision. Is there even a substance like that known to man? Probably not, man. I can't think of anything like that. I don't know why you'd want to test like arsenic or ricin or something like that for something. But no, we don't have any substances like that. Battery acid, maybe? So we know cannabis doesn't meet any of those requirements. As Hiller points out, there is a disconnect between what the government claims legally and how they actually operate. The government has a patent on cannabis for the treatment of diseases like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, HIV-induced dementia, and autoimmune disorders. And under U.S. patent law, you can't apply for a patent unless you can demonstrate some form of the utility of whatever you're seeking a patent for. Quote, the government has obtained a patent for cannabis based on the fact that it works, says Hiller. Moreover, since 1978, the federal government has been sending joints to medical patients as part of an IND, or Investigational New Drug Program, only to find that cannabis alleviates symptoms for those 15 participants without any serious side effects. Then in 2014, the Department of Treasury issued a FINCEN guidance to banks advising them how to work with cannabis businesses, even though none of them decided to actually do any of that. Meanwhile, 29 states and 3 territories all allow some form of cannabis to be used medicinally or recreationally, meaning more than 60% of the population has access to this plant. Quote, it just makes no sense for the government to classify cannabis as a drug that is so dangerous that it can't even be safely tested, while at the same time encouraging companies to do business with cannabis businesses, says Hiller. It makes no sense for the federal government to have a medical patent and distribute cannabis to patients for nearly 40 years through the IND program, while at the same time claiming that it has no medical efficacy and can cause brain damage. Ask the federal government, do you really believe it? And the fact of the matter is they don't. As with same-sex marriage, Hiller says if the federal government had to defend cannabis prohibition on facts, they'd lose. Quote, this lawsuit represents the truth, says Bondi, a criminal defense attorney who is an expert in federal cannabis law. Quote, marijuana has a recognized medical purpose. For the government to persist in the position that it doesn't is foolish. And one more thing about all this government, claims and this and that. They're the ones that are always telling us, oh, we need more research. We don't believe that it cures cancer. We don't believe that it kills cancer cells, even though that's another thing that they have a patent on. We don't believe that it does this or that, and we think it's this and that. And the reason why they enforce it so hard is because they say it's dangerous. Well, first of all, I've been known to say this a few times. What is the dangers you're even talking about? What dangers? Does it make you so you go blind if you smoke too much of it? I mean, that would be a danger. That would be if you could demonstrate that happens, and it's a fact that if you smoke too much weed that you went blind or something, then that's something you could demonstrate and prove, and then we would know that would be one of the dangers. But you don't have anything like that. I remember the government is so fucking crazy that at one time they said, oh, marijuana kills brain cells. Well, we know that how you figured that one out is you were literally suffocating monkeys to do your lab test to try to say that marijuana was killing brain cells. You talk about marijuana causes developmental problems in young teens and shit. No proof. No studies. No fucking proof. No nothing. You say marijuana leads to harder drugs. You don't even have correlative studies that prove that. You don't have any fucking thing to prove that. All you have is a bunch of junkies in rehab saying, oh yeah, I smoked a joint one time. And then they're like, well, was that before or after you started doing smack? That was before, man, when I was a little kid. And it's like, gateway. If you smoked weed, then it's going to make you smoke something else. Or, no proof of that. No correlation. Correlations don't even line up. So, when you say that we need more studies to prove that marijuana is this and is that, that's irrelevant. We'll get to those. But for you to have this overabundance of caution and throw fucking people in prison over this plant, you need to have some studies to prove that anything you're saying is fucking accurate. Because we know marijuana can't kill you. There's no way you can overdose on it. You can concentrate that shit as hard as you can and then consume however you want to try to do it as much as you can, and you won't die. You can't. So, yeah, let's see your studies. Next time you try to make some outrageous claim about what marijuana does to you, please show me the fucking studies to back it up too. No matter who wins the case, it's a sure bet that the losing party will appeal, according to Bondi. These issues are so important to the public interest, so important to the constitutional safeguards that a full evidentiary record has to be made. We welcome this as an opportunity to demonstrate fully and fairly that we are right. Meanwhile, Alex Bortell must choose between breaking the law and preserving her own life. Quote, every time I look around my classroom, I think about what my classmates might be when they grow up, or when we grow up. But there's nothing I can be because the government thinks I'm bad, she says. I know they're wrong. I do hope we can win this. If that happens, maybe I can be a doctor, or if I need to, run for legislator. Please do. So there you have it. Brave little girl, but more so brave family from Texas. And that's the look you get right there when you hug a marijuana plant. I don't care who you are, how old you are, what your relationship to the plant is, but just knowing that there's an awesome plant out there that has so many benefits. And one of them being that it makes you think about shit. And that's what they don't like. They don't like people out there thinking about shit. What do I think about all this? Well, I'm kind of a little bit worried about this October 13th bullshit. So on October 13th, the judge either can make the choice to hear the fucking case, which would be most appreciated. We've had a lot of bad, shall I say, turn of events in the federal government since Trump has got into office. We've had this demon, Jeff Sessions, and his goons just come out of the woodwork like cockroaches trying to attack marijuana in the midst of a fucking opioid crisis, nonetheless. You know, like in a time when we need to go more towards the way of decriminalizing all drugs, more towards treating addiction like a disease that it is and not like some kind of a criminal activity that the addicts are participating in. We need to treat law enforcement. We need to have a whole new approach as to how law enforcement handles drugs. Quite frankly, we need to rewrite the doctrine on this so-called drug war, and most of all, we need to get rid of the CSA. But none of this is going to happen if this judge just punts this thing. The judge says, "Okay, motion granted," bloomp, and then these guys are going to have to regroup and take an appeal to the Second Circuit. Now, appeals courts are pretty good, so we don't know what will happen there. This could be delayed forever, but we'll see what happens. They have the best lawyers I've heard, you know, doing this pro bono, and you know, everybody else involved in this lawsuit all has their own like stakes in it. Last time I did the story, I talked a little bit about Marvin Washington, the football player. So yeah, there's where we are with that one, guys. Not much of an update, but last time I didn't really talk about Alexis. So this time you got to find out about the 12-year-old girl that kind of got the ball rolling on this whole thing. And another one of those exodus movement of Ja people that had to pack it up and move to Colorado in this crazy country where there's so many different attitudes towards marijuana. But when it comes to medical marijuana, we literally have medical marijuana refugees living in Colorado that can't leave the state because their medicine is in Colorado and they're in like a fucking island. These people came from places like Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Ohio, Montana. I've reported on people coming from Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi. Did I say Missouri? Well, let's say Missouri twice because Missouri needs to be mentioned twice or 3 times or 4 times. Even the Dakotas and South Carolina. All these places, and New Jersey. And not to mention Maryland, there's places that have medical marijuana laws on the books, and people are still moving from there to Colorado to get medicine. So it's a real thing. Yeah, the marijuana refugee crisis in Colorado is a pretty big deal. Underreported, I'm sure. I don't know if you want to call it that. It's kind of a little bit of an overcharacterization. Maybe it just, I mean, the Exodus thing's a big deal. Some places, like there was that Jeremy Faison's district in Kentucky. Is that Tennessee? Yeah, Tennessee, where so many people moved out of his county to go get medical marijuana in Colorado that he had to move. He had to pack up and go fly out there and see what the hell all the hype was. He had to figure out what was going on with this. Was it working? How is it working? What can you do to bring that back home? And that's it. I'll update the story as it develops. And meanwhile, like I said, check out the link below for the shirts. If you just, this is, first time you've seen any of my videos, definitely think about subscribing and then come back for more. That's all I got. Later.